Hey everyone, and welcome to this deep dive on Amsterdam.
Amsterdam. I'm excited for this one.
Me too. I think our listeners are really going to enjoy learning about this fascinating city.
It's such a cool mix of history and modern life, you know?
Exactly, and that's what we're going to be exploring today, using a bunch of different sources.
Yeah, we've got historical accounts, travel guides.
Museum websites, even an academic paper.
Wow, the works.
So we're going to try to blend it all together and give everyone a really immersive experience of Amsterdam.
I like it. A journey through time.
All right, so let's dive right in. Have you ever heard Amsterdam called the Venice of the North?
Of course. Who hasn't? Canals, canals, canals.
Well, it's more than just a nickname. Amsterdam was literally built out into the sea.
That's right. And to this day, it's still slowly sinking. Crazy to think about, right?
It is. So those canals that everyone loves, they're not just a pretty face then.
Definitely not. They started as simple dams on the Amstel River way back in the 13th century.
13th century. So
That's
we're
right.
talking medieval times here.
Exactly. And over the centuries, as the city grew,
They just kept building more canals.
yep, this whole intricate canal system, it shaped how Amsterdam grew, how people got around.
Like little watery roads.
Exactly. The canals even created boundaries between neighborhoods and, of course, helped the city manage all that water.
It's hard to imagine Amsterdam as anything other than this grand, sophisticated city.
Right. But believe it or not, it all started as a humble little fishing village.
Really, a fishing village. When was this?
Around the 13th century.
So around the same time they were building those first canals.
Yep, pretty much. Amsterdam wasn't like some other European cities that just seemed to explode in size.
It was a slow burn.
Yeah, you could say that. It took centuries to transform that swampy land into the metropolis we know today.
Oh.
Building on a swamp. Talk about a challenge.
What were some of the biggest hurdles they had to overcome?
Well, first and foremost, they had to control the water. I mean, it was everywhere.
Makes sense. What did they do? Build dikes?
They did, eventually. But early on, it was all about earthen walls and wooden palisades.
Not exactly the most intimidating defenses.
No, not really. And it wasn't until a devastating fire in 1452.
Oh, a fire. That's awful.
It was. But it actually forced them to rethink their building materials. That's when they started using more stone and brick.
Those sturdy buildings we see today.
Exactly. And it's around this time things really start to shift for Amsterdam.
Like how?
Well, the Protestant Reformation was in full swing, remember?
Right.
And a lot of wealthy refugees fled from Antwerp to Amsterdam.
Seeking religious freedom.
Exactly. And they brought their skills and their fortunes with them. It was a turning point.
So that influx of wealth and talent set the stage for Amsterdam's golden age.
You got it. And it's more than just tulips, you know?
Oh, I've heard about those tulips. What was Amsterdam like during this golden age?
It was amazing. Imagine bustling trade, incredible art, this international atmosphere, people from all over Europe flocking to the city.
Sounds electric.
It was. Picture well-lit streets, those grand canal houses we talked about, a thriving cultural scene.
And some of those mansions are still standing today, right?
Absolutely. There's the Huis met de Hoofden, or the House with the Heads.
The house with the heads, that's got to be a story there.
Oh, yeah, there's a story for sure. But let's not forget about the economic side of things.
Right.
Because this is also the time of the Dutch East India Company, headquartered right in Amsterdam.
The Dutch East India Company, weren't they like a massive trading power?
Huge. They had a monopoly on trade with Asia spices, fabrics, all sorts of exotic goods.
Wow. That explains the golden age.
It does. But of course, we have to acknowledge the darker side, too.
The colonialism.
Yeah. Amsterdam's prosperity during this time was built on the backs of others.
It's a reminder that even the most beautiful destinations have complex histories.
Absolutely. We can't forget that.
Okay, so we've got this thriving city built on canals, shaped by trade and migration. The golden age is in full swing.
Right.
But what about the city itself? How did it grow? It's fascinating looking at these old maps you provided.
The maps, they really show how Amsterdam expanded over time.
You can almost trace its growth outward, like fingers reaching into the surrounding land.
And those fingers, those are the canals.
Right.
Specifically, the Herengracht, the Keizersgracht, and the Prinsengracht.
They sound familiar.
They're some of the most famous canals in Amsterdam. And they weren't just dug haphazardly, you know. They were planned, strategically developed.
It's put a lot of thought into it.
Tons. And not just from a practical standpoint. They were also designed with aesthetics in mind. That's why Amsterdam has that iconic look, those concentric rings of canals.
It's urban planning as art.
Exactly. And here's something else cool. The maps show this concept of 5 green fingers.
5 green fingers. What's that?
They were these open spaces, parks, and green areas designed to connect the outer parts of the city to the center.
Ah, so everyone had access to nature.
Exactly. It was a brilliant idea, and it's something that still influences Amsterdam's park system today.
It's like they were thinking about sustainability and livability centuries ago.
Way ahead of their time. But it makes you wonder, how does a city with such a deep history adapt to the 21st century? How does the Venice of the North stay relevant in a constantly changing world?
That's a great question, and I think it's one we need to explore further.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. How does a city like Amsterdam, so tied to its history, keep up with the modern world?
It's like a balancing act, right? On one hand, you've got these canals and 17th century houses, and on the other, you've got modern transportation, a globalized economy. How do those two things coexist?
Well, one way is that Amsterdam has really moved away from its trading past. Those ships loaded with spices and goods.
Right, right. That was the golden age.
Exactly. But today, it's much more focused on culture, tourism, services.
So instead of ships bringing in goods, it's planes bringing in tourists.
Haha, basically. But it's not just that. Amsterdam has also held on to its reputation for liberal policies, for being very welcoming.
And that's been a bit of a double-edged sword, hasn't it?
Yeah, definitely. It's a complex issue for sure. But even on a practical level, trying to fit modern transportation into a historic city is a huge challenge. They've even had to fill in some canals to make way for traffic.
Wow, I bet that was a controversial decision.
Oh, yeah, for sure. But let's shift gears for a minute. Let's imagine we're actually going to visit Amsterdam. What are the must-see spots, the things we can't miss?
Yeah, let's plan a trip. Okay, so first on my list, the Anne Frank house. That's an essential experience, right?
Absolutely. It's a powerful reminder of history, of the human spirit.
And for the art lovers out there, we can't forget the Rijksmuseum and the Van Gogh Museum.
Those are musts for sure.
Right.
Seeing the night watch in person or those Van Gogh sunflowers, there's nothing like it.
And to really get a sense of those canals, those canal houses.
What about a canal cruise?
The canal cruise, yes.
Yeah.
Such a unique way to see the city.
And for a true Amsterdam experience, we have to rent bikes.
Oh, definitely. Everyone bikes in Amsterdam. It's the perfect way to explore those charming neighborhoods, the side streets.
Plus, it's good exercise. Speaking of neighborhoods, if you're looking for something a little bohemian, a little artsy,
I'm all ears.
check out the Jordan district. Lots of art galleries, cool shops, cafes. It's got a great vibe.
It's on the list.
Yeah.
Okay, so I remember you mentioning earlier that Amsterdam is built on millions of wooden piles.
Oh, you remembered? It's true. Because of that swampy ground, they had to use this technique called pile driving.
Pile driving, what's that?
They would hammer these huge wooden logs deep into the ground until they hit something solid.
It sounds like a lot of work.
Oh, it was a massive undertaking. But here's the crazy part. Those wooden piles, they're still there.
Still there, after all these centuries.
Yep. And being submerged in water without oxygen, it's actually preserved them. They've basically petrified, become almost as hard as stone.
So the city is literally built on a foundation of petrified wood.
That's a great way to put it. It's incredible.
It is. But you also mentioned that those famous canals, they weren't always so picturesque. Something about a Grachtengordel.
Haha, yes, the Grachtengordel, which translates to canal girdle, but with a much less pleasant connotation.
I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Well, as Amsterdam grew, so did its waste problem. And in the 17th century, those canals became the dumping ground for everything.
Oh, no, really? So those beautiful waterways we see in photos.
And we're basically open sewers.
Not so romantic now, is it?
Yeah.
So they were called the canal girdle because they smelled like...
Well, let's just say it wasn't a pleasant aroma. It was a major health hazard, too.
yuck. So how did they turn things around?
It took a lot of time and effort, but they eventually implemented proper sewage systems, waste management practices.
It's a good reminder that even the most beautiful places have their not-so-glamorous chapters.
It's true. But what's really cool is how forward-thinking Amsterdam was even back then. We talked about those 5 green fingers, how they prioritized access to nature.
Right, they were ahead of their time.
Exactly. And the way they used their canal system, it was so innovative. The canals weren't just for transportation. They shaped how the city was organized, created those distinct neighborhoods, each with its own character.
So the canals were almost like a social blueprint for the city.
That's a great way to think about it. And of course, we can't forget about the influence of religion. Those early churches and convents, they were more than just places of worship.
They were centers of power, right?
Exactly. And Amsterdam's religious landscape has been constantly changing. We talked about the Protestant Reformation, but over the centuries, the city has welcomed so many different faiths.
It's a city built by immigrants, shaped by different cultures.
And that's still true today. Amsterdam is known for its tolerance, its diversity. It makes it such a welcoming place.
But I want to go back to something we discussed earlier, the issue of rising sea levels. It's a bit of a sobering thought, considering how much of Amsterdam's identity is tied to water.
It's a big concern, no doubt. I mean, think about it. They've spent centuries trying to control the Amstel River, building this intricate network of canals.
And now they're facing this whole new challenge.
Exactly. The water that has shaped Amsterdam is now a potential threat.
But I'm sure they're taking steps to adapt.
Oh, absolutely. They're building flood barriers, investing in sustainable infrastructure.
That's going to take a lot of ingenuity, a lot of collaboration.
For sure. But you know what? Let's take a break from these serious topics for a bit.
Sounds good to me.
Because when we come back, we're going to dive into some of the fun, quirky aspects of Amsterdam's culture.
Okay, I'm ready for some Dutch delights.
Get ready for bicycles, stroopwafels, maybe even some salty licorice.
Bring it on.
All right, we're back, ready to explore some of the fun, quirky things that make Amsterdam so special.
I am. What should we start with?
Well, we can't talk about Amsterdam without talking about bicycles.
Oh, absolutely. It's like they're part of the city's DNA.
They are. It's not just a mode of transportation, it's a lifestyle. You see people using bikes for everything.
Grocery shopping, taking the kids to school,
Right.
even carrying furniture.
Exactly. And have you ever seen those cargo bikes? The back feeds?
Oh, yeah, the ones where they can practically fit a whole family in there.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Talk about sustainability and practicality. Okay, this is a bit of a love it or hate it thing, but we got to talk about drop.
Drop? What's that?
Salty licorice.
Oh, the licorice. Yeah, I've heard about that.
Some people go crazy for it. There are whole stores dedicated to different varieties.
I'm not sure I could handle the salty licorice, but I'm definitely up for some stroopwafels.
Ah, now you're talking. Stroopwafels are a must-try.
Those thin waffles with the caramel filling, yes, please.
And we can't forget about Dutch pancakes, the pannenkoeken.
They're like giant, thin crepes, right?
That's a good way to describe them.
Yeah.
And you can get them with all sorts of toppings, savory or sweet.
Okay, my stomach is rumbling now.
Sure.
But let's talk about art for a minute. We've touched on the big museums, but what about Amsterdam's more underground art scene?
Oh, it's thriving. There's a really vibrant street art scene, murals, installations, all kinds of cool stuff.
It's like the city itself is an art gallery.
Exactly. You'll find art in the most unexpected places. Keep your eyes open when you're exploring.
I will. Any particular areas you'd recommend checking out?
The Jordan District is always a good bet for galleries and creative spaces. But honestly, you can stumble upon amazing art just about anywhere.
Okay, this is random, but did you know Amsterdam has a connection to ancient Egypt?
Oh yeah, the Temple of Tafa. It's wild, right?
Tell me about it.
So this temple was originally built in Egypt during Roman times. Fast forward to the 20th century, they're building the Aswan Dam.
Right, I've heard of that.
And the dam was going to flood a bunch of ancient sites, including this temple.
Oh, they had to move it.
Yep. And as a thank you to the Netherlands for helping with the dam project, Egypt gifted them the temple. They carefully took it apart, shipped it to the Netherlands, and rebuilt it in a museum.
So there's a piece of ancient Egypt in Amsterdam. That's incredible.
It is. It just shows how interconnected our world is, how cultures have always influenced each other.
And speaking of cultural influences, Amsterdam has always been a haven for immigrants, right?
Absolutely. From those fleeing religious persecutions centuries ago to more recent waves of immigration, the city has always embraced diversity, and it shows.
You see it in the food, the music, the art, everything.
It's part of what makes Amsterdam so vibrant, so unique. This deep dive has been incredible. We've explored so much.
We've gone from those first canals in the 13th century to the challenges of the 21st.
We've talked about art, history, those quirky Dutch treats.
I think our listeners have a really good sense of what Amsterdam is all about.
I hope so. It's such a captivating city.
Whether you visit in person or just explore it through books and stories, Amsterdam has something for everyone.
Every cobblestone, every canal house has a story to tell. Go out there, embrace the spirit of Amsterdam, and let yourself be enchanted.
Well said. And on that note, it's time to wrap up our Amsterdam adventure.
Until next time, happy travels, everyone.
See you later.